Wagons, welcome to noise11.com. The show that you did, I think it must have been 2 years ago, it was definitely pre-pandemic, about Warren Zevon is coming back. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. It was a marvellous capsule of a very interesting life.
Yeah, a very complicated genius was Warren, and it's just great to immerse myself in an underappreciated catalogue. You know, he's one of those artists that can make you laugh and cry within the course of a sentence or a verse. And, you know, I think he's up there in terms of lyrical quality with, you know, Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan. You know, he's incredibly poetic, musically complex. You know, and I think he's known as the Werewolves of London guy. He's known as a novelty song guy. You know, the one that's on Gold 104 every single 4 songs is not representative of the complexity and subtlety and poignance of his work. You know, so if people just show up expecting to hear "ah," you know, they get they get a lot more. So, you know, and it's
but
exciting.
They also get that.
They get that as well. They get it kind of twice, in fact. So come for that too.
Yeah. There's the term singer-songwriter, example Jackson Browne. But for Warren Zevon, I guess, I'd call him a songwriter-singer in that a lot of people probably know a lot of his songs more so than they know him, through people like Linda Ronstadt, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's a sign of a good songwriter when your songs live over and above your own performance of them. And, Warren Zevon is definitely one of those. His songs blew people's minds ever since he started writing. Like, from what I understand, in those early days in LA, like, he grew up on the West Coast, hanging out with these chilled out dudes, you know, in the shadow of Laurel Canyon jangle, you know, a whole lot of, you know, magic mushroom pot addled trippers. Yet this guy, Warren Zevon, I think has more of an East Coast sensibility. You know, he was mentored by Stravinsky. He had this poor immigrant heritage, and his songwriting is pointed. It's not easy. It's not take it easy. He hung out with the Eagles. Can you imagine, like, his songs singing Desperados Under the Eaves in and amongst Jackson Browne and the Eagles? You know, it's like you can see why his songwriting stuck out in that industry, but really fascinating that it also was a product of that industry too, you know. So, you know, another twisted complexity here.
Yeah. There was remarkable respect for the man as a songwriter, wasn't there?
But yeah, he had amazing friends. Just to see him, you know, there's a great sort of mini documentary made about his last record, when he refused chemo, when he had a bad case of cancer, and refused in order to finish his album. And, you know, he gets the likes of Bruce Springsteen to come on, not necessarily to sing, but just to shred a solo on one of his songs. You know, it's sort of, you know, he had this, you know, he had the respect of Bob Dylan. Tom Waits was in the shadows of these parties. Like you say, Jackson Browne was the man who kind of lured him back from an exile in Spain, with the promise of a record deal. You know, he had immense respect amongst all these incredible songwriters who wish they could write a song like Zevon.
Well, there was, I think Jeannie Needs a Shooter was the Springsteen song, wasn't it? I think Springsteen dusted off something on his most recent album. I think it was the Letters to Home album, something from way back when, and finally released it on this current Bruce Springsteen album. So, like, we're still getting trickles of Warren Zevon decades down the track.
People are nodding their heads, you know, to him, and will continue to do so. You know, I think I had these moments as I was growing up in my history where I would passively consume and love Warren Zevon. And the first time I heard Warren Zevon was when my mum would listen to 3AW in the morning before we went to school, Lawyers, Guns and Money would come on. And that was and I loved that song. You know, it was this awesome song. I connected with it as a toddler. You know, I thought it was undeniable. And then, you know, grew up to find an appreciation for Werewolves of London. I was a massive Dave Letterman fan as I was a teenager. And I remember watching, I actually saw live, or, you know, at the time, that famous final interview he did when Warren had a death sentence, and it was Warren's last big interview with Dave, when he devoted a whole episode to talking to Warren and playing Roland, the Headless Thompson Gunner, and he played, I can't remember what else he played, but, you know, it wasn't really until this production that I got to expand my respect for the man, you know, and when I got to fully immerse myself in the depth of his songwriting, which I always sort of knew in abstract, and always one of those things, I've got to listen to more Warren Zevon. Doing this show made me do so, and I'm very thankful. It's like a masterclass in songwriting. You know, I feel like I'm going to leech and steal as much as I can of the lessons I've learned from learning these songs for my own work, whether Warren likes it or not. You know.
And the songs you name-checked in there, Werewolves of London, Lawyers, Guns and Money, what a classic album, the Excitable Boy album. It's probably the closest thing you ever came to having a hit record.
Yeah, that's, I think, for those who haven't heard Warren, it's the best record to start. The title track's one of my favourites. Of his, you know, that's an incredible record. Got the sonic, that dead 70s drum sound, you know, the actual sound of that record is just as good as the 70s got. I mean, it sounds so good. Werewolves of London had the Fleetwood Mac rhythm section on it. No one else could quite get the groove except Mick Fleetwood. No surprise, really.
Yeah. Now, when you do the show, you're performing the songs of Warren Zevon and telling the story of Warren Zevon. You're not playing Warren Zevon. It's not
as much as I try.
Yeah.
I've watched too many Russell Crowe and Nicole Kidman movies to get the accent right. You know, if they can't do it, I can't either. So, you know, I sort of have a lot of fun drifting in and out, but this show, a lot of people are familiar with the story of Warren and, you know, the sins of the 70s. Like, he got away with every single cardinal sin in the 70s, and he could get away with way too much back then. And he did. It's actually telling the story, but it seems his life's split up into two parts. You know, you either met Warren when he was young and basically screwed up, and he was a bit of a dickhead, and then if you met him after a certain point, you know, hanging out at the Hawaiian Hotel, perhaps, you know, in self-reflection, he was an absolute angel, kind of paying penance for his past sins, and you know, he had this sort of schizophrenic, these periods of different stages of his life, and it's almost too difficult a story to tell. So a lot of the show is sort of vignettes, anecdotes, without being a sort of Wikipedia page. I'm not a big fan of those shows that basically just read the Wikipedia, you know, let's start off and then it just, you know, tells the story like a bad Hallmark movie. It's more dipping in and out of parts of his life that interest me in the band, and also my relationship that is formed with his songwriting too, which I think is a nice way to approach it without being too funk and wagnalls.
He did tour Australia. I interviewed him in the 90s at some point. I found him to be angry, bitter, quite frankly, a bit of a bastard.
Oh, so you met him in the night. So what I say isn't true at all. From the horse's mouth, it was a dickhead throughout. Good. That's good.
He wasn't in a good frame of mind when he came to Australia around 92, 93, whatever that might have been.
I had the pleasure of having one of the guys that supported him in Frankston, I believe, when he played. I think Steve Hoy, I think is his name.
Yeah, Steve Hoy, yeah. Yeah, guitarist.
And he introduced himself to me, and we had a little chat before the show. And, you know, he made the point that the actual Warren Zevon Accidentally Like A Martyr show that we're doing now had bigger crowds than Warren had himself when he toured through the 90s, you know, where he was playing in front of 15 people at you know, these sort of strange venues, which is, you know, that's really sad. But, you know, I'm sort of glad to be holding the flame high and, you know, hope that there's a whole new generation of Warren Zevon appreciators that we can help usher in.
Yeah, that probably explains a bit of the bitterness when he was in Australia too. There were some very, very strange venues, both in Sydney and Melbourne, that they put him in. Tiny little, like almost wine bars that they would put, you know, someone who I considered a legend and, you know, have all the albums by.
It's so funny. I mean, he was probably, people go through peaks and troughs. I mean, we mentioned Springsteen earlier. There was that tour he did around the Tom Joad era where, you know, he's playing to stadiums, but, you know, he went through that point where he came to Melbourne and he played the Palais. It was no Frankston RSL, but it was you know, for him to play the Palais compared to what he's doing now, you know, he was going through one of those phases, and perhaps Zevon was as well, or at least that's what I like to think, to get myself through the night. Fun.
To be continued. I have seen the show in its previous incarnation, pre-COVID, and I thoroughly recommend this one for any Warren Zevon fan, or just a fan of great songs to get along and hear a great story.
I honestly believe that anyone who has a fascination with songwriting should see this. It's the work, the catalogue is a masterclass. So, you know, come along and have a look.
Henry Wagons, thank you very much for being here at Noise11.com.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for putting up with me.